Steir-Livny, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Culture at Sapir Academic College in Israel, and she also serves as a tutor and course coordinator in the MA program in Cultural Studies and in the Arts Department at the Open University. Her books and articles focus on the Holocaust commemoration in Israel, and her first book, Two Faces in the Mirror, analyzes the representation of Holocaust survivors in Israel's cinema, while her second book, Let the Memorial Hill Remember, analyzes the changing memory of the Holocaust in contemporary Israeli cultures. Other works include Is It Okay to Laugh About It?, which analyzes Holocaust humor, satire, and parody in Israeli culture, and 3 Years, Two Perspectives, One Trauma, which compares the films and newsletters of American Jewish organizations and Eretz Israeli organizations in the peak years of the Zionist struggles for the Jewish state.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And Wolf discussed in his first statements of the conference that we're talking about the intersections of past and present. What happens with Kristallnacht Memorial after 1938, and other presenters have discussed it as well. And I would like to ask how Kristallnacht is remembered in contemporary Israeli and show you a kind of a complex option of this memorialization. Now, my case study is the reactions to a demonstration which took place in Israel in 2012. This demonstration took place in southern Tel Aviv. It was against the African refugees, and the people who demonstrated asked to deport these refugees from Israel. During the demonstration, there were violent attacks on African bystanders, and shop windows were smashed. And this demonstration was very quickly titled by Israeli left-wingers as Israeli Kristallnacht or Kristallnacht in Tel Aviv. Now, my standing point of this talk is that Israel is a post-traumatic society which acts out the Holocaust. Now, I can stand here for hours explaining the how and why and when, but as you know, I have 20 minutes, so I won't be able to do it. You'll have to take my word for it. But if you'd like, in the question and the answers part, I can show you 2 examples of contemporary storage which, in my opinion, epitomize this phenomenon. Now, as a society drenched in Holocaust awareness, I'm going to use this Kristallnacht, this Israeli Kristallnacht case study, in order to show 3 claims. First of all, in a society such as the Israeli society, the Holocaust and Nazism are politicized on a daily basis. Left-wingers and right-wingers use them in order to highlight their agendas. Now, Kristallnacht, as many other events, have become a social-political tool. This is the first claim. The second claim is that while you can say that Kristallnacht is commemorated through these events, you can also look at it from a different perspective and claim that as an event, as an historical event, it is completely deflated. It becomes a myth, a symbol, a trope, no more. And the other issue I will touch on briefly is the case of Holocaust humor or Nazi humor, which many of you know that research has many complex issues with this Holocaust humor. Many look at it as tasteless, as vile, as something that ridicules the Holocaust. But my claim is about this Kristallnacht in Israel, about other aspects as well, that actually Holocaust humor in Israel, being this unique sphere of Holocaust awareness, many times just duplicates what you can find in the serious debates. Now, regarding African refugees in Israel, this is a very complex problem which raises much controversy and many stormy debates. Refugees from Africa began approaching Israel and entering Israel in the new millennium. They came especially between the years 2007, 2012, and then a wall was built between Israel and Egypt, so they couldn't arrive anymore. Now, from the very beginning, they were brought by buses. This was arranged by the government to the southern parts of Tel Aviv. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Tel Aviv, but the southern parts of Tel Aviv are very poor neighborhoods in which their inhabitants are from the lower deciles of society. And now they've received these thousands and thousands of refugees, these poor, jobless people who have no status in Israeli society and still don't have any status in Israeli society. And it created a great controversy. And right-wingers and extreme right-wingers or radical right-wingers are there to increase the flames. Now let me pause for a minute for two quick remarks regarding the pictures I'm about to show you. So first of all, the pictures I'm about to show you are not pretty pictures. This was not one of Israel's most glorious moments, to say the least. But I will have to ask you not to generalize. Because yes, in the southern parts of Tel Aviv, there are racist people, there are hate groups, there are people who support deportation even though they know that deportation equals death. But there are many others. I don't know if you're aware, but we had an election to the municipality in Israel last week, and those people who support deportation tried as hard as they can to get one of them to be elected into City Hall, and they have failed miserably. Whereas the other party, who supports a general solution for the refugees within Israel and a solution for the southern neighborhoods of Tel Aviv, who've been neglected for decades and decades by the government, they have received 14% of the votes, which is a lot for a new party. So this is my first remark. And my second remark, I'm going to portray it as a game or as a clash between right wing and left wing. And of course we know that life is not math, and we do not live our lives based on binary divisions. So it's not precisely as that. There are right-wingers who oppose deportations. There are left-wingers who wouldn't mind if some of them would be deported. There are those who support calling it Israeli Kristallnacht. There are left-wingers who oppose calling it Israeli Kristallnacht. So it's much more complex. But I cannot attend to this complexity in each and every sentence I say. So I say to begin with, it's a very complex issue, not only right and left. So the first time this term Israeli Kristallnacht appeared was on April 2012. A Molotov bottle was thrown into a kindergarten of people who arrived from Eritrea and from Sudan. And people from NGOs, Israeli NGOs, began calling it Israeli Kristallnacht. It appeared here and there, and you can see here another example from April, but it only became an idiom a month later. And this is the famous demonstration I've told you about earlier. Now, we talked at the beginning of the conference about terminology, whether it's a pogrom, yes or no. Was it organized by the government, yes or no? And here you can find a mixture, because the ones who organized this demonstration are Michael Ben-Ari, who was a Knesset member, and he was supported by far right-wing activists, Baruch Marzel and others. The people who appeared on stage came from the Israeli right wing. There were Miri Regev, who was then a Knesset member, and now she is the Minister of Culture, Yariv Levin, and many others. But all hell broke loose within the public that was there in south of Tel Aviv. So let me just show you how it looked like. It was not nice pictures. So as you can see, African bystanders were attacked, and this is blood stains on the wall, and nobody got killed, but there were injuries, again, blood stains. Now, within hours from this demonstration, left-wingers began posting on social media their responses, and everything had to do with Kristallnacht. I know it's in Hebrew, but they've called it Israeli Kristallnacht, Kristallnacht in Israel 2012, and they've posted it on blogs, on posts. They created a hashtag titled Israeli Kristallnacht. And as you can see, this is not a bottom-up reflection. This is not a top-down reflection. This is a bottom-up grassroots revolution against what happened. And the only prominent newspaper in Israel who used this title, this Kristallnacht 2012, whoever of you knows Israel can tell the name of the newspaper. It's of course Haaretz newspaper, and you can see it here above. This is their article claiming Kristallnacht 2012, look at them and look at us. And this is an article which talks about the way Israeli society breaks down, declines, and it's a slippery slope from here to eternity. They didn't just call it Kristallnacht. They created and circulated memes and videos to describe the way what had happened in the south of Tel Aviv resembles the Kristallnacht of 1938. And I want to show you a quick example of what they did. It says Kristallnacht in Hebrew. Just one quick second. One of the most voiced phrases in this demonstration was of Miri Regev, which is now our Minister of Culture, and she claimed, and she yelled at above the stage, that the Sudanese are a cancer in the Israeli body. This is one phrase, and the other phrase was, again, I don't know how well you are familiar with what's happening in Israel. What happened is that the right wing have succeeded in creating or turning the term left-wingers a curse. If you want to curse somebody, call him a left-winger. This has become a curse. And Miri Regev, because you're going to hear her shouting in a minute, she claimed that it's the left-wingers' blame. They are to blame. They've caused it. They've brought these infiltrators into the south of Tel Aviv. And may I remind you that Israel in the last 40 years, almost 40 years, is governed by the right wing. So this is, of course, a lie. So when you hear a woman shouting, this is her shouting both of these phrases. Okay, so this was, again, the Israeli Kristallnacht. So this was one example, and the other one are comparisons between the organizers and Hitler. This is Michael Ben-Ari, and there's a statement of Michael Ben-Ari saying the infiltrators are not hungry for bread, they are hungry for women. They open up their robes and chase after girls, and there's Hitler in Mein Kampf. The young Jew, we all know it, the young Jew with the black hair waits for hours and satanically seduces a young innocent girl, and so and so. Now, I must state that these examples of what happened right after this demonstration is not something which is identical just for this demonstration. It is a part of a much wider discourse in which the Holocaust is integrated within the problem of the African bystanders. And you can find it all over the place until nowadays. Just another example, this is from 2018. As you can see, the famous picture of this boy from the Warsaw Ghetto, but now, of course, he's an African from Eritrea, also the Sudan. And how can we do without the Anne Frank reference? Of course, again, these are Africans and the Anne Frank family. And within this much wider discourse, Holocaust survivors play a major role. And this is, I talked earlier about the grassroots reaction, but this is Yediot Ahronot. It is one of the most prominent newspapers in Israel. And here you have Holocaust survivors. We're going to hide the refugees in our houses if they will be deported. And the narrative is, how can we've been refugees for so many years and nobody wanted us before the Holocaust, how can we send them on their ways? Now, simultaneously to these serious debates, people also created and circulated memes. Black humor, satirical memes regarding this same issue. Now, when I discuss internet meme, I use Limor Schiffman's statement that meme is a group of digital items sharing common characteristic of context, form, and stench, which were created with awareness of each other and were circulated, imitated, and or transformed via the internet by many users. Now, memes research claim that memes that we find on the internet are much more than just a fun pastime or a game, and are to be taken seriously. They reflect general social mindsets. They help create political awareness, and sometimes they can influence people even more than the serious debate. Now, in meme research, you can find this statement of a political mimetic photo. A mimetic photo, when we're dealing with political issues, is a photo, a real one, a genuine one, which was taken during the event, and then people create their some sort of memes regarding this particular photo. Now, this photo it was taken in this demonstration. This is a woman who wrote on her shirt, "Death to the Sudanese," and this was the most famous picture of this demonstration, and the one who took this picture is a third-generation Holocaust survivor named Tomer Neuberg, and he put it in an album which he called Breakdown. And there were so many memes containing this photo, and I'm going to show you a couple of them. And here she says, it's a play on words in Hebrew. You promised me tons of Kristallnacht, and crystal meaning drugs, but I ended up only with an energy drink, meaning I didn't get my drugs. And if you're familiar with I'm sure you're familiar with the shirts that my friend went to London or Paris or whenever, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. So all my friends went to a pogrom, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. And here she has a love affair with Hitler when she says, you hang up, you hang up, no, you hang up. This is a schmoopy version, and okay. So when I'm talking about the way that Kristallnacht is deflated, it's taken out of every historical context, I found out that during using these memes, they were also integrated within other symbols of sadism, murder, and racism. For example, here's King Joffrey, we all know from Game of Thrones, and he says, listen, did you receive the t-shirt that I sent you? And she says, yes, it's right on the spot. So this is King Joffrey, which we all know is related to sadism and murder and so on. And here you can find her with other friends from the Ku Klux Klan, okay? It's the same thing. She's telling them, we are coming in a minute, and they are waiting for her. And there is another one of the Ku Klux Klan where you can see Miri Regev, and they tell her, hey Miri, thank you for coming, to being with us, and so on. So you see how the Kristallnacht is completely deflated. It's a symbol, like the Ku Klux Klan is a symbol, like King Joffrey is a symbol. It's all intertwined into one homogeneous entity of racism, hatred, murderous trends, and so on. And the last caricature I wanted to show you, which is my favorite, and I always show it, this is by very, very, in my opinion, successful artist called Mish Roznov. And there is this bully, this neighborhood bully, which on his body you can see all the most vicious, racist things they are to say. Death to the Sudanese, which we already know. A good Arab is a dead Arab. We hate every Jewish Orthodox. Let the IDF kick your butt, and so on and so on. So he combines everything like we saw earlier with King Joffrey and the Ku Klux Klan, but he also gave the solution. Why do we act like that? Why do Jewish Israelis become so violent? Because when we look at ourselves in the mirror, this is what we see. The frightened victim from the Holocaust. And he called this caricature a self-image problem. And I think it summarizes it in the very best way. This is why we behave the way we behave. So I think that I've shown you here in the short time that I had, that the Kristallnacht is alive and well in Israel 80 years after it happened. But it's treated and remembered in a very problematic way. First of all, it becomes a social political tool. Then it moves between serious debates and humoristic debates. And one of the most important things is that we have to consider the way that is remembered, because from what we see here, Kristallnacht in 2018 moves between commemoration and oblivion. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll take questions.
Yeah, very interesting. Curious, do you have any thoughts on the role of basically the fact that Israelis are required to perform military service, and how that affects them when they come out?
Yeah, and again, here regarding your question, you can find two answers in Israeli society, one from the left wing and one from the right wing. The right wing says we have to be in the IDF, we have to serve our country, we are surrounded by enemies, and we have to defend ourselves the best way we can. And many times they use the Holocaust to say that now, back then in the 30s and 40s, nobody cares. Now we don't care. We are here to defend ourselves, and we're going to do everything in order to defend ourselves. And the left wingers, some of them claim the complete opposite. It is the occupation who turns us into bullies. It corrupts the Israeli society from within. It turns us into a violent, aggressive society. And you can find this aggression and this anxiety in many other aspects in Israeli society, and not only in the IDF. So not only the Palestinians suffer from the occupation, but it is us, Jewish Israelis, who suffer from the occupation as well.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really interesting. You showed, towards the end, you talked about the memes, right? And it seems like the ones that you were showing were memes from the those who clearly were opposing what was taking place. Was there also sort of the use of this imagery by people who are against the asylum seekers and Africans who are coming to Israel?
This is a very good question. The most amazing thing is that most actions you can find in Israel, the Israeli culture, mostly come from the left wing. If you look at Israeli cinema, this is unbelievable. You look at Israeli cinema in the last 3-4 decades, and you try as hard as you want to look for something from the right-wing perspective, there isn't any. 99% of the films are produced from a left-wing perspective. It is as if the Israeli minority, because left-wingers in Israel are a minority, express themselves through culture. So I couldn't find any memes which reflect the right-wing perspective, but I did find a position to this meme. How can you compare? How can you claim this is Israeli Kristallnacht? How dare you? We are not Nazis. It's not the same, and so on. So this you can find, but not other memes which reflect the other side. No.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I would like to go back to my presentation and the context of the move from the term Kristallnacht to the term Pogromnacht.
Yeah.
It was exactly, this is like 100% the same context. The left under siege is going back to the imagery of fascism or national socialism in order to establish a political context, which it feels it needs to establish. So the similarity is just enormously striking. And I think it would be worth to think about actively comparing these two instances. Second, earlier, in the 80s, in the 1990s, when there were many occurrences of anti-immigrant violences in Germany, there was a very popular pop group, Black Twist, who published an album called Kristallnacht, and a very popular song was called Kristallnacht, and established exactly the same parallelism between what happened then and violence against immigrants, then as a rallying call for the left. And so a left in the defensive seems to be very prone to that. I would like to ask you why you use a term, you use the terms that the Kristallnacht is deflated, or is a trope or a symbol. Symbols are very powerful means of communication. I don't see the deflation, so to speak. I rather see an inflation. I rather see an operationalization of a historical trope in this context. So I would challenge you, or would like to ask you why you say it's deflated.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I completely agree. This perception of Nazism, fascism, racism as a one unit is exactly what you find in Israel, in which everyone shouts at the other that he's a Nazi, no, you're a Nazi. This is the discourse. Now, regarding the thing that I call it deflation, on the one hand, you can say that Kristallnacht is commemorized 80 years after, nobody forgot, it's there. Whenever there's a demonstration like that, we call it Israeli Kristallnacht, but it's taken completely out of the historical context. And I think that one should stop and ask ourselves, is every violent demonstration, which includes shattering glass, is Kristallnacht? This comparison is problematic. Are we really Nazis? Is this really a resemblance of the Nazi? This is why I say that it's completely deflated, because the context is completely gone, okay? This is the problem. And this is what happens in a society, let me remind you, in which we learn about the Holocaust from kindergarten. And now it turns into a symbol of violence plus shattered glasses equals Kristallnacht. Is it? This is the question that we must ask.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk, and I very much agree with your answer you just gave on stating. I wonder if I'm still thinking about the last picture, this from this Art of the Mirror, which is very impressive.
Yeah.
But I wonder about, I mean, if, of course there is trauma, and this can be a reaction to trauma, but how will you then explain all the anti-migrant violence in Europe? So maybe you can also say it's a sign of the normalization of Israeli society.
I guess that's how the right wing in Israel would present it, yes. we are a part of a much wider global phenomena, you're right. But I think that there are similarities, of course, but again, Israeli society and its attitude towards the Holocaust is different. We live the Holocaust on an everyday measure. Research, not only my research, but also other research, shows how the educational system, the media, the culture, they all frame the Holocaust as an ongoing event in Israel, in the present, and not a historical event that had happened 70 years ago. This is why in Israel it is so strong, and the Nazi and Holocaust references are to be found each and every day on every single occasion. There isn't one weekend when you open the newspaper and there are not any Holocaust and Nazi references. We're drenched in this awareness, and hence the Kristallnacht associations, in my opinion.
Question in the back.
One more comment. I listened to another in another conference to a paper about the border, exactly the border, the problem that you were mentioning as well. Many of the Israeli soldiers that they were serving tried and they resisted or imprisoned the immigrants coming crossing the border. I was asking the researchers if they knew also so much about the past, because migration was exactly crossing the border, about that something. And they mostly state that, although you mentioned that education was very much involved what happened in the Holocaust, it might be a very general form of education rather than being or knowing so much of the specificities. For example, how they could relate also with those soldiers at the border itself.
Yeah, well, again, we learn about the Holocaust since kindergarten, and we know all there is to know from the educational system and from living within Israel about it, and still you have the right wing and the left wing, which have completely different attitudes towards Holocaust commemoration and the way it should be integrated or is integrated within the daily lives, or how could we remember, how should we remember. When the one side says, nobody helped us back then, we are here to help ourselves. That's it, there is no choice. We are the ones who are going to help ourselves. And the other side says, what you said, we were refugees. Nobody wanted us. Nobody opened the doors for us. Now it's our job to do what they didn't do and open the doors. So there is the same Holocaust awareness, which is completely divided between these two political groups. and there is no way to integrate those two groups.
One quick announcement, does anyone here have a silver infinity? We have a car that is parked outside on the red curb, and it needs to be moved if it is a silver infinity.
Yours
It's a car, not a
expensive.
Oh, it's a car, yes, it is not an infinity. We are referring to a California automobile, not a mathematical
I'm on the line. I feel a little scared. Hopefully I'll be able to read. Is there any light here? Anything that could be supposed
I'll
to?
never actually hitting it. I'd be very interested.
But it has to be in
The next
silver.
conference.
Yeah, but that's being sort of shown off.
So, it's a follow-up of the many interesting question in the presentation. Fascinating. You show the violence, of the political debate, and also the amazing simplification, on both sides. It was there in the mainstream presses, talking about the public discourse, in the serious press, arrests, but more in-depth analysis, comparing the two events. Kristallnacht was centrally organized, which was not the case, etc. Could you find this more?
Yeah, I looked it up, but I couldn't find it.
No, it's just like slogan and polarization.
In a certain way, I mean, I don't find it terribly surprising that, of course, so like the iconography of the Holocaust, that's so readily available is going to be mobilized or redeployed as different modalities of instruction within these ideological debates, right? I mean, I don't know, I just feel, in a certain way it makes, I don't want to say it makes a perverse sort of sense, but that's exactly going to be the turf on which things will be mobilized, legitimated, and delegitimated, right? I mean, of course it would come back to this imagery or these iconic images, because isn't it about it's about the foundation, just as the U.S. argues about the Constitution, right? It's going to be the, these images that have all this emotional, investment and I guess the foundational narrative attached to it, right?
Well, first of all, as a Holocaust researcher who researches Holocaust commemoration in Israel, I must say that sometimes I feel as if the Israeli Association is arranges between Holocaust associations and Holocaust associations. This is our world. This is the way we look. These are the glasses through which we look upon the world in each and every aspect. It's the political aspect, it's the social aspect. It's pathological. And I must tell you that before I began my research, I believe that while dealing with these associations, symbols, and so on, I thought that in Israel it's going to be more in-depth because we learn about it so much, because we're so preoccupied with it, because we're so engaged with it. And no, it's completely shallow, flattened, and it surprised me because I was looking for something else which I couldn't find.
I just have a thought here, and I wonder, it seems that the very survival of Holocaust memory it blends into the defeat and end of Holocaust memory, because the very memory removes the substance of the Holocaust. Okay, that we know. The question is whether this kind of phenomenon can be found elsewhere, or that this phenomenon reflects on the fact that the Holocaust was indeed a unique event in history, and therefore cannot find its place in history again, which is what you're saying.
First of all, we are all aware of the book The End of the Holocaust, which it doesn't discuss Israel, it discusses America, so the author believes that it can happen somewhere else, but I don't think that this end of the Holocaust can ever happen in Israel because of the educational system. So on the one hand, you find these in-depth discussions in the educational system, which try to make the students aware of the most complex problems and so on, and maybe create some kind of a unique perspective. But on the other hand, you can find the public memory, which is completely shallow. It's combined of myth and of symbols, and it's either the child from the Warsaw Ghetto, or is it Anne Frank, or it's the Kristallnacht. And you find these two phenomena in Israel simultaneously, one next to the other, and they all go through a straight line towards the future. So who knows what the future will be, but you can find both of them in Israeli culture.
When you're talking about that in terms of how Holocaust memory functions in Israel, it sounds a lot like how a political scientist, Scott Strauss, writes about the role that founding narratives play in 5 African states that he compares. And he's interested in trying to understand why genocide occurred in some African countries and not others. And he traces it back to the founding narrative. And what strikes me in terms of how... I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm sorry.
He traces it back to what?
The founding narrative. And so when a state establishes itself, it can establish a narrative that's more open and pluralistic, or one that's very closed and turned in on itself. And the founding narrative can also define who the enemy is. And does the enemy have to be eliminated, or can it be, or those other groups in the society, can they be somehow be incorporated? So Scott Strauss, The Making and Unmaking of Nations. And so what I was struck with by listening to your presentation was this idea of how, right, founding narratives they're established, but they don't have a fixed meaning. And you can see that, I think that's what I see being struggled over here, right, with the Holocaust demand that we push for greater inclusion and to see this as a reason why we have to bring these people in, because they are like us, or is it exclusionary? And so I see this as an argument over what that founding narrative is. And maybe it started to collapse, and that's why the fighting is so intense.
Well, first of all, as we all know, collective memory changes over time, and in my research I show how the collective memory of the Holocaust changes throughout the decades. But if we're talking about founding narratives, and I researched from the very beginning, you can find how the Holocaust is integrated within, let's say, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in two separate, contradictory ways. On the one hand, there are people who claim since 1948 the Arabs are the Nazis, therefore we must defend ourselves in any cost. This is one narrative which you can find since 1948, and since 1948 you can find the opposite narrative saying, listen, there is also the Nakba. There were Arabs here after the War of Independence, they weren't. So who are we in this position? Are we the victims? Are we the perpetrators? And you can see that this is the founding narrative of Israel. It's complex to begin with, and this complexity moves on within the decades, and it doesn't change within this stance of complexity, because you can always find opposing stories within the foundation narrative, and moving forward you can find it as well.
Yeah. I mean, just to follow, doesn't it mean that the Holocaust doesn't count anymore? If I follow it very closely, no, it doesn't count in the narrative. If the narrative is so easily used and turned and plakative, they say in German, doesn't it mean that to the contrary of what we would instinctively think, I mean, Israel too, it's usable because the memory has gone and people don't realize the reality of the Holocaust. You understand?
Yeah, I understand, and I must answer your question with two short stories, which in my opinion epitomize this issue, because I don't think the Holocaust is gone. I think the Holocaust is drenched within our soul. There is this Israeli poet called Dornsife Center who wrote that the Holocaust is tattooed on our collective arm. And if you're trying to find it out, there was a story a couple of weeks ago. There was a young journalist named Sapir. She's a well-known journalist in her 30s, and she posted on Facebook that she was traveling through Denmark or something like that. She had to sit in coach in the train, but she went to sit in the first department, like every Israeli does. And the conductor, and she said, and she posted that the conductor asked me to show him the ticket. I showed him the ticket. He was very polite, and he told me to go back to coach. And then it was like the Holocaust. Jews are hunted in Europe once more. I went there and social media killed her. She was ridiculed. She became the laughing stock of so many posts. There were, paraphrases of this post, like people were posting, I'm standing in the supermarket, I have 20 items, and I'm standing in the express cashier, and the cashier lady tells me to go to another cashier. It's the Holocaust all over again. It's like my grandfather Chechi in Czechoslovakia and so on. People killed her, and she had to delete the post. Okay? And as I was reading it, I was thinking about the hypocrisy of the Israeli society because I research social media and I know how much Israelis translate their daily lives on social media. You can find it everywhere, but as opposed to her, she did it in a really pathos-ridden way, and she put on her face through the and showed the train going around, and it was really pathos-ridden. Like those who use it and do it daily, do it by using black humor. And if you do it by using black humor, then you're okay. And I've found tens of examples of how Jewish Israelis interpret their lives through black humor. And I have tons of examples. For like, in a minute, it's Sunday, I'm riding the train to work, it's so crowded. Since the 1940s, Jews haven't suffered so much. Hashtag do not compare. And there is a loud knock on the door. It's either the pizza delivery or the Gestapo. I just have to say.
I have some examples within Jewish communities, the same examples within Jewish communities in Britain, you know? Now when you see the Jews in Britain, within the community, now we understand what German Jews had to suffer in the 1930s because, you know, we have COVID, you know?
Yeah, so
and they mean it. It's not black humor.
I know, but Israel is totally black humor. Just have to tell you my favorite one. My wife invited friends I don't like. I'm hiding in the attic. It's Anne Frank all over again. Okay? This is what you find in Israel. Now, if you do it, it's okay. But when she did it in this pathos-ridden way, and she was ridiculed. And then I was thinking about it, and we went on our family vacation up north in Kibbutz Yvon. And you know that there are still kibbutzim who have a communal dining room, and downstairs they have the board where they have all the announcements. And a family relative called me and said, you have to go and see what's on the board. And I was going there, and there was a division of the neighborhoods of the kibbutz, and you have this names of trees and flowers, and one neighborhood is called ghetto. And I couldn't believe my eyes, and then I looked again, it's called ghetto. So I left my coffee, and those of you who know me know it's very hard for me to leave my coffee, and I ran out to see what it's about. And the people of the kibbutz told me this is the new neighborhood of the young couples of the kibbutz, and the houses were built in very close proximity to one another, therefore they are called ghetto. And this is not a nickname you whisper to one another, it's on the board. This is how we live the Holocaust. It's not a ghetto, it's kibbutz Yvon. But these two examples show you how drenched we are in this awareness and why we look at everything through Holocaust glasses. This is our situation.
On that note,
thank you very much.
Thanks, Liat, and I just wanted to say to our viewers in the live stream that we had to switch the order of the panel because Liat has to catch the plane. So thank you.
Thank you.
all right.
So we don't have this room?
No, we have to speak. But it was told by Liat was able to
All right, we're going to move right to our next speaker. Baijayanti Roy is a postdoctoral researcher at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, where she also received her PhD. And her current academic interest is to trace the connections between India, the country of her birth, and Germany, the country of her residence. Her present research focuses primarily on the history of, can we keep it quiet in the background?
The middle one?
Focus on the history of German Indology from the late 19th to the mid-20th century. And several of her forthcoming publications also relate to Nazi Germany, focusing on the trajectory of Indologist Heinrich Zimmer in the Third Reich, the dark attractions of Eagle Nest, Hitler's tea house, and the state of knowledge about Holocaust in present-day India. Having worked as a journalist in India, she remains a keen observer of Indian politics, particularly the politics of Hindu nationalism, and holds sway over India. She has spoken in several international conferences and written articles in Indian newspapers on the influence of political Hinduism on particular Hindi Bollywood historical films. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take the mic.
Yeah, thank you for this introduction, and of course, big thank you for the organizers, Professor Gruner and others, for inviting me here, because this talk is something that I wouldn't be allowed to hold in India. So it's very important for me. So, Gujarat pogrom refers to 3 days of intense violence, 28th February to 1st March 2002, mostly perpetrated by members of the majority Hindu community against the minority Muslims in the Indian federal state of Gujarat. You see where Gujarat is, yeah? The red point. Hindu-Muslim clashes, usually referred to as communal riots, are not uncommon in India. But the violence in Gujarat was not a riot. It was a premeditated, carefully orchestrated mob attack on Muslims, instigated by right-wing Hindu nationalist groups. The state government, under the Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP, was complicit in starting the bloodshed and condoning the perpetrators. The episode resulted in the death of around 2,000 people, mostly Muslims. Also around 150,000 people, also overwhelmingly Muslim, were rendered homeless. Residences, business establishments, and places of worship of Muslims were systematically desecrated and destroyed. This episode has been compared generally to anti-Jewish pogroms conducted by the Nazis. I would like to argue that the Gujarat pogrom has more parallels with the Kristallnacht than any other pogrom, and that these commonalities are not simply coincidental, though the events are separated by space and time. I will provide a comparative context of the two cases and then discuss the following aspects: the dynamics of the episodes, the distinctive traits, and some of the effects of these two different yet not dissimilar events. So, the context. Hindu nationalist ideology projects India as a Hindu nation in which religious minorities like Muslims and Christians have no place. This brand of political Hinduism, usually referred to as Hindutva or literally Hindu-ness, developed in the 1920s and 30s. The proponents of Hindutva openly admired aspects of European fascism and Nazism. M.S. Golwalkar, a Hindu nationalist leader, wrote in 1939 that persecution of minorities by the Nazis was a good lesson for the Hindus to learn and profit from. Vinayak D. Savarkar, another exponent of Hindutva, blamed the Jews of Germany for failing to assimilate, allegedly like the Muslims of India. Demonization of the Muslims in India is not confined only to supporters of Hindu nationalist politics. British colonizers, pursuing a divide and rule policy, encouraged tensions between the two communities using stereotypes, for example, about oppressive Muslim rulers and oppressed Hindu subjects in medieval India. Medieval India was ruled by a Muslim Mughal dynasty for centuries. These colonial stereotypes were widely disseminated and they persist. The partition of Indian subcontinent into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan in 1947 was accompanied by brutal Hindu-Muslim clashes, exacerbating mutual distrust among communities. Animosity towards minorities as the enemy within remains alive in societies that feel an urge to avenge past indignities, be it the real phenomenon of colonial subjugation or a perceived one of Muslim tyranny over Hindus, as in India, or a military defeat for which the Jewish minority was perceived to be at least partially responsible, as in Germany after the First World War. Kristallnacht was the culmination of a phase of systematic persecution of Jews from 1933 onwards. Though most of the 500,000 Jews of Germany had lived in the country for generations and considered themselves to be fully integrated Germans, they were often considered to be the other by many. Their position as minority rendered the Jews particularly vulnerable to oppression. The prominence of Jews in economic and professional spheres also made them targets of jealousy among many non-Jews. The pogrom in Gujarat also represented a high point in the indirect but systematic discrimination against the Muslims that intensified with the Hindu right-wing BJP's coming to power in the state in 1995. The BJP has since then become entrenched in Gujarat. Its political ideology has infiltrated deep into the state's administrative machinery. The BJP is now in power at the national level as well, which is why I won't be allowed to touch on this topic in India now. Now it's important to remember that Muslims in Gujarat, like a lot of Muslims in India, were converted Hindus. They were lower caste Hindus who converted to Islam to escape oppression from higher castes, and they have a very fluid relationship with Hindu religious customs and habits. So they are not really people who identify easily with the Saudi Arab brand of Islam. Political and cultural spaces in Gujarat are dominated by a large community of upper caste Hindu and Jain traders. Jains are a religious sect who consider themselves different from Hindus, but the Hindu nationalists consider them to be Hindus. So commercial alliances are often formed on the basis of caste and religious ties. In commercial, Gujarat is predominated by this business ethos. This nexus of religious caste and commerce is particularly susceptible to Hindu nationalist politics with its upper caste and pro-business agenda. Moreover, a section of Muslims in Gujarat are prosperous traders, making them objects of envy. So, dynamics. Incidents that sparked off the carnage in both cases were pretexts. The shooting of the German diplomat Ernst von Roth in Paris by the 17-year-old Polish Jew Herschel Greenspan on the morning of 7th November 1938 served the same function as the burning of a train coach containing Hindu nationalist political cadres at the station of Godhra, a town in Gujarat, on 27 February 2002, allegedly by a Muslim mob. This was most probably an accident. 57 Hindus were burnt alive in the train. In both cases, politicians in power aggravated, if not actively created situations conducive to pogroms. As news of the attempt on Ernst von Roth's life reached Germany on the evening of 7th November, anti-Semitic violence broke out in the region of Kurhessen. Violence spread to nearby areas overnight and continued throughout 8th and 9th November. These pogrom-like attacks, in which Jewish shops were looted and synagogues burnt, were instigated mostly by regional administrators and actively aided by members of the SA and SS. They also attracted perpetrators who were not part of the Nazi organizations. In most cases, the police either did not intervene or did so half-heartedly. On the evening of 9th November, Hitler signaled his ascent to a nationwide anti-Semitic pogrom as a supposed reaction to the death of Ernst von Roth. Goebbels noted that the decision of the Führer to withdraw the police and let the demonstrations continue so that the Jews could feel the rage of the people. He communicated this decision to the party officials. Now the nationwide coordinated pogrom began. Fast forward to Gujarat, 27 February 2002. Though the administrative officer of Godhra, Jayanti Ravi, gave a public statement that the Godhra train burning was an accident, the Gujarat Chief Minister Narendra Modi, now the Prime Minister of India, communalized the incident through an emotional address on television, calling it a terrorist act, in which one community, meaning Muslims, targeted another community, meaning Hindus, though he could not offer any proof. That very evening, Modi organized to bring the charred bodies of the victims of train burning to Ahmedabad, Gujarat's largest city. The arrival was broadcast on television. On the same night, violence broke out in parts of Ahmedabad, which the police did nothing to abate. Attaching the level of terrorism to the Godhra incident implied a connection with Islamic terrorists of Pakistan. It also implied that the loyalty of the Indian Muslims lay with Pakistan. Though baseless, this equation could play to the insecurities of the Hindus and Jain communities. Thus, a crowd could be mobilized for concerted violent action against minorities. You must remember that Gujarat is on the Pakistan border. This is reminiscent of the German political propaganda on the eve of Kristallnacht that the attack on von Roth was the outcome of an international Jewish conspiracy, thus rendering the incident a global significance that justified taking retaliatory actions against Jews residing in Germany. On 28 February, a large mob, mostly comprising men wearing Hindu nationalist, within quotes, uniform, khaki pants and saffron headbands, saffron is the color associated with Hinduism, went on rampage against Muslim lives and properties identified on the basis of voter registration lists. The attackers were seen to receive regular instructions on cellular phones and kept reporting back. Two residential areas with relatively large Muslim population in Ahmedabad, Gulbarg Society and Naroda Patya, were particularly hard hit. The victims included Ehsan Jaffrey, an ex-member of parliament from the Indian National Congress Party, which is now in opposition, who sought in vain to seek help from the police. There were spectator crowds who occasionally participated in looting. By the evening of 28 February, violence spread to other towns. In most cases, the police came too late or were mute spectators. Sometimes they aided the perpetrators, for example, by firing at the victims. "We have no orders to save you" was a common refrain of the police to Muslims looking for protection. The police also arrested mostly Muslims, though nowhere at the scale of Jews arrested during Kristallnacht. The district administration of Gujarat remained aloof as the bloodbath reached remote rural areas on 1st March. In a parallel to Kristallnacht, both police and the state administrators took orders from their political masters, probably due to a combination of ideological inclination and considerations of career prospects. During the Kristallnacht, a few policemen showed professional restraint by not manhandling the Jews and keeping the marauding crowds in check. One police officer, Wilhelm Creutzfeld, actually prevented the burning of Oranienburger Straße synagogue in Berlin, which we referred to earlier. It is not known whether these policemen faced consequences. The few police officers who tried to act ethically during the Gujarat pogrom had to face the wrath of the politicians afterwards. Rahul Sharma, a Hindu police officer who saved 400 Muslim children and arrested troublemaking Hindu activists, was actually demoted. What makes the Gujarat pogrom particularly evocative of the Kristallnacht is the purported role of the politicians in power. At a meeting with the top police officers on the evening of 27 February, Narendra Modi reportedly instructed the police not to stand in the way of the Hindu backlash to the Godhra incident. After the bloodbath, Modi publicly legitimized the pogrom as a spontaneous reaction of the Hindus, an eerie reminder of Goebbels ascribing the Kristallnacht events to the healthy instincts of German people. So, features. The role of media in inciting hatred among majority communities also shows surprising parallels. Just as the story of the attack on Vom Roth dominated the front pages of German newspapers, particularly Völkischer Beobachter and Der Angriff, which spewed venom against the Jews, popular Gujarati language newspapers like Sandesh and Gujarat Samachar published unfounded write-ups in inflammatory anti-Muslim language after the Godhra incident. Both the pogroms were justified by the perpetrators on the ground of a supposed victimization of the majority community through an inimical minority community which was construed as treacherous, since its loyalty lay allegedly with its co-religionists and not with the nation. Violence towards the minority community was thus defined as an act of patriotism and community pride, whether of the so-called German Aryans or of Hindus. Hindu nationalists claim, by the way, that upper caste Hindus are descendants of Aryans, though Hitler considered Indians as racially fallen. Another common trait was the targeting of religious establishments of the minorities. Just as more than 1,000 synagogues were systematically burnt down during the Kristallnacht, in Gujarat, hundreds of mosques and dargah, or small roadside shrines of Muslims, were reduced to ashes. Hindu religious symbols like the image of the monkey god Hanuman were placed at the ruins. The idea of purity played a role in the fascism-inspired logic operating in both cases. Jews were seen as belonging to an inferior race that resulted in polluting the pure Aryan Volksgemeinschaft. In Gujarat, Muslims are considered impure, partially because for the dominant Hindu and Jain communities with their vegetarian ethos, Meat eating and ritual animal sacrifice associated with Muslims are abhorrent. You must understand that the Hindus have a strong concept of pure and impure food. Getting there. Yeah, I just have to mention the word beef to my conservative Hindu relatives, and they are almost faint with horror. Pogroms are often marked by sadistic behavior and sexual perversion. While Kristallnacht saw widespread torture and humiliation of the Jews but few planned murders, Gujarat pogrom was marked by targeted killings of Muslim men, women and children, and at least in one macabre instance of fetus. A fetus was ripped apart from the belly of a pregnant woman and thrown into the fire. In this respect, the term ethnic cleansing can be applied to the Gujarat pogrom. Kristallnacht was a prelude to genocide. The role of sexual violence was also different in the two episodes. Though there were instances of molestation and rape of Jewish women, particularly by SS members, these were either not very widespread or not widely reported, since they carried the stigma of Rasan Shande or racial disgrace for the Aryans. This kind of racial defilement was condemned more severely by the Nazi court than any other crimes committed during Kristallnacht. Widespread sexual violence, including brutal gang rape of Muslim women, was a singular feature of the Gujarat pogrom. Muslims are stereotyped by many Hindus as sexual predators who are out to rape Hindu women. So raping Muslim women was seen as a way of getting even with the supposed sexual aggression of Muslim men. Also, this is important, many traditional Hindus regard women as symbols of a community's honor. Violation of Muslim women's bodies thus meant besmirching the honor of the entire Muslim community. Now the last part, the effects. In both instances, victimization of minority communities outlasted the pogroms. Nazi Germany introduced a spate of legal measures to deprive Jews of their economic and social existence. In Gujarat, social and economic boycott of minorities occurred through extra-legal means. Many Muslim businesses and residences were taken over by Hindus at lower prices, since the fearful owners moved into pre-existing Muslim ghettos or into new ones that proliferated after the pogrom. Such ghettos are systematically denied regular supplies of water and electricity. The state and central government, also the Hindu nationalist BJP at the time, did not provide adequate aid to refugee camps consisting mainly of Muslim survivors. Businesses were warned not to hire Muslims. Customers were told not to buy from Muslim shops. Some villages put up notices of being Muslim-free. Most of those indicted in the Gujarat pogrom, including Narendra Modi and his close associate Amit Shah, the present Home Minister of India, have so far managed to evade all charges. The victims of the riots, however, continue to wait for justice. Relative impunity of perpetrators and inadequate justice for victims also marked the November pogrom trials, not only in Nazi Germany, yes, but also in the judicial cases of 1947-49. In both these cases, violence against minorities was successfully used by the ruling dispensations to accrue political advantage. November pogrom allowed the Nazi leadership to consolidate the Volksgemeinschaft and strengthen its own position. In Gujarat, Modi could win the state elections soon after the pogrom by portraying himself as a protector of Hindus against Muslim terror. Kristallnacht signified the beginning of a new ominous phase of Judenpolitik. Gujarat 2002 was an indicator of the systematic discrimination that Muslims frequently face in BJP-ruled India today, despite the voices of protest that are raised within the country. These protesting voices continue to distinguish democratic India from totalitarian Nazi dictatorship, at least for now. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes.
No, you go because you're the answer.
Okay. I was wondering who came up with this word pogrom in these countries? Is this you, or is this has been used by the press or the official discourse?
This has been popularly used by the press and unofficially by many people. It's been referred mostly by the left-leaning press and by the left-leaning people.
Two informational questions. One, insofar as the Sikhs do synthesize Islam and Hinduism. Do they play any role in this at all? Are they concerned? And the second one is, I think you said that one of the reasons that Hindus became Muslims was to escape the caste system. Yes, the oppression as being a lower class. And so the Hindus who attack these Muslims, are they from a particular caste?
The second answer to the second question first. The Hindu nationalist BJP, most of its supporters are upper caste Hindus. So I think it is mostly the upper caste Hindus who feel that they have the prerogative to oppress lower caste people and Muslims. And the first thing, the Sikhs consider themselves once again, like the Jains, to be a separate religious community. And in 1984, after a Sikh murdered the then Prime Minister of India, there was a pogrom against the Sikhs also, which one can, I suppose, refer to, but I didn't because of time limit.
This is actually a very good segue. Thank you so much for your talk, because I actually wanted to raise the question, do you see similarities and differences when you look at Gujarat and 1984 Delhi? Because you make the point that this was kind of very organized push pogrom in Gujarat, and how do you see the similarities and differences with the 1984 events?
Well, the 1984, there are similarities because the Sikhs were targeted, but the situation was rapidly brought under control. And the perpetrators were mostly people belonging to the Indian National Congress Party who have to show a secular image to, they portray themselves as secular and non-partisan. So it was done much more in a clandestine way, and the rate of violence was not, the scale of violence was not comparable.
Can I have a follow-up? Can you tell the audience what was the scale of Gujarat? My sources, what I know about the 1984 is that there are numbers between 2 and more 2,000 victims in 1984. So what is the scale in Gujarat?
Well, in Gujarat, the official scale is 2,000, but I think it's unofficially much more. And there was this rate of homelessness. Many people Muslims were driven to homelessness. There are people still living in refugee camps, and I think in 1984 that was not the case. And the situation was brought under control much sooner because the Congress realized that they have to keep their image and not show that they are so partisan.
Yeah, to what degree in, let's say, Indian higher education, or more broadly than that, are books and other kinds of texts about the Jewish Holocaust, and in fact pogroms more broadly, how much would say, what opportunities would people have to acquire this information?
Yeah, very good question. I presented a paper in Munich this year in February about the coverage of Holocaust in Indian schools, and they differ a lot from state to state and between the different school boards. In India, there are different school boards. There are a few which really give a balanced view and they are pretty good, but these are the elite English medium state boards which very few people can afford. And it depends a lot on the politics of the state government in power. In Gujarat, for example, the textbooks used to openly praise Hitler as a strong man who brought honor to the country and so on. And it was changed only after the Israeli government protested.
One question about the actual implementation of the onslaught. You refer in one of the slides to the orders given through mobile phones. Am I correct? So the question is, to which degree you or anybody can establish actually a direct order of chain of command, which is obviously such an important element in the implementation of Kristallnacht. I think that's very important in order to distinguish this incident, which could also be a pogrom system in the definition of Paul Russ, from what Kristallnacht represents. And the second question, Kristallnacht, I mean, we have not really looked at the macro level of events in the context of Kristallnacht or the macro structure. So that this actually made, we have mentioned many times that there was obviously a transition from exclusion to physical persecution and etc. Do you think that Gujarat pogrom is such a transition? Do you see a very significant qualitative difference in anti-Muslim violence before and after, or rather not?
The second question first, yes, the Gujarat pogrom was definitely a decided transition from earlier times. As I said in my talk, there have been Hindu-Muslim riots before, but in those, they were also orchestrated, but the scale is different and the brazen way in which the minorities were targeted is different. What used to happen earlier was a lot of things happened undercover. A lot of things, there was a pretension that it was, spontaneous. But this time, nobody really pretended. Only Modi said it's spontaneous, but nobody really pretended that it was spontaneous. So this was definitely a big change. It was open, daylight. And the first question, well, there's some controversy about this. As you can understand, this is a very, very touchy topic. There are journalists who covered it at the time, and they saw members of the ruling Hindu Nationalist Party sitting at the police stations receiving information and giving orders, but nobody has openly written about it except one journalist who is under death threat. So it is a very, very controversial subject.
On that note, and also you made a sort of an offhanded remark during your presentation about how you maybe couldn't talk about it in this way in India. So I'm curious, within sort of Indian academia, or even just more broadly speaking, are people sort of talking in any of these ways to make these kind of comparisons? In the public sphere, besides the sort of the use of the term pogrom, to what extent is the discourse surrounding this series of events limited by the political situation or otherwise?
Well, nobody has been openly talking about this since the BJP, this Hindu Nationalist Party, came to power at the center in 2014. It is a totally taboo subject. As I said, there's this one journalist called Rana Ayub who recently wrote a book about it, and she has to be given 24 hours police protection, and she received death threats in social media every day. So nobody really talks about this anymore, but when this happened in 2002, there was a lot of talk and people could discuss this openly, but now it's changed.
Is there any link between that Nazi recovery of, Hindus through the Sanskrit linguistic, that entire linguistic definition of Aryanism, which then ended up in these, what are you go to institutes called Müller something, where you have exactly these very nationalist policies that take up Nazi rhetoric of the Aryan, and there's this very clear lineage to this linguistic form of nationalism. Does this inflect it in any way?
Yes, this is the subject of my present research. I am researching German Indology in Nazi Germany. And I have also published a paper on Max Müller, where I show how the Hindu nationalists and also some mainstream nationalists, including Gandhi, who actually stood for Hindu-Muslim unity, took up Müller's rhetoric of the ancient Aryans being Indians.
Exactly.
I mean, now, at present, everybody knows that it's a myth and it's not so openly discussed, but as I said, the Hindu nationalists like to believe that they are descendants of Northern Aryans, though Hitler categorically denied that, but they choose to ignore it.
I have one other question, if that's okay. And that concerns, there have been lots of studies done on Sikhs and the professional status of Sikhs, where Sikhs were sort of analogized to Jews in Europe, especially in terms of the long history of persecution being drowned in wells, Muslim. I mean, this is like a different type of violence. Can you also comment on the kind of like analogies to the Holocaust? Because that also gets taken up quite a bit in kinds of comparative genocide studies.
Well, Sikhs also have some Sikhs also have a very difficult relationship with the Indian government, and not only the Hindu nationalists but also the Congress, because the Sikhs, there was one point when the Sikhs wanted a separate state for themselves called Khalistan, and that movement was brutally suppressed by the then Indian National Congress Party. And now there is a status quo, but there is, of course, there's one branch of that movement that's, I think, still alive but not so active.
Just for curiosity, did you look at international media coverage at the time, and were there any references to Kristallnacht at the time, or
I don't
British
know.
or American press, or?
I don't know. At that time I was in Germany and there was not anything in the German media, but I don't know. But that is an interesting angle to pursue. I should have looked it up.
Just at least two dark ironies occurred to me. One, you didn't refer to any racial element in there. It's Hindu versus Muslim, but yet the Muslims are racially Hindu. Point one. Point two, there's, of course, 2,000 years of tradition from all the Indian literature, from the Upanishads, all the way from the Bhagavad Gita, about, beyond that, ahimsa, but there's a universalism in there. This apparently plays no role in this, but have people spoken up on behalf of the fact of what Hinduism is all about? So I asked you about these two, what I call dark ironies.
Yes, what Hinduism is all about, nobody has really come to any conclusion, because it is a lot of things to a lot of people. It's a collection of beliefs. There is no one Hinduism. The same goddess Durga was worshipped on a lion with 10 hands in my native state, Bengal, is worshipped with 8 hands and on a tiger in South India. So even the gods with same name are different. So there is no one universal Hinduism. But the point is, Gandhi, for example, came from Gujarat, and he tried to preach the non-violence, the ahimsa, the non-violence, but it has never had struck any deep roots in Gujarat, which is very ironical.
What about the racial element?
And also the racial element, I think a lot of that has to do with British colonialism, the colonial census. Because earlier, in the pre-colonial days, the boundaries between Hindus and Muslims were rather fluid. There were, of course, the Brahmins who were very rigid. There was the aristocratic upper-class Muslims who were also very rigid and very exclusionary. But among the ordinary people, I think there were the beliefs and the ritual practices had a lot of fluidity, a lot of flexibility. But British colonial census started to, rigidly classify people as Hindus and Muslims, and that's how things became more streamlined.
If we have no further questions, thank you. Okay. Our last speaker for today, and in fact, for the conference, is Nathalie Segeral, who is an assistant professor of French and Translation Studies at the University of Hawaii-Manoa. Her research publications and teaching revolve around memory and trauma studies, women's and gender studies, the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, and the French-speaking South Pacific. Her most recent publications include a French translation of David Chappelle's The Kanak Awakening, Inscribing the South Pacific in the Francophile World, Motherhood, Non-Motherhood, Gender Violence, and Infanticide in 3 Ocean women writers, and Reclaiming Motherhood During and After the Holocaust in Shaba Rosenfarb's Little Red Bird and Valentine Bobby's Kinderzimmer. In the summer of 2018, she will be a fellow at TOLI, Summer Seminar in the Holocaust Education, and a fellow at the University of London's Summer Institute on the Holocaust and Jewish Civilization.
So I'm aware that I'm the last person of the last panel and everybody is very tired, so I will try to be brief. Also, I'm not an historian, I'm a literature person, so my paper will be rather different. I will be reading quotes from texts. I look at Holocaust and Rwandan genocide narratives as pieces of literature, mostly at published texts that were published as such, so it's slightly different. So, paraphrasing the title of Kathy Caruth's seminal study, Unclaimed Experience, Trauma, Narrative and History, this paper examines the centrality of the Nazi pogrom as a productive echo chamber. So I'm quoting Michael Rothberg, and I will be using his theory of multidirectional memory a lot here, but I won't go into detail about that. So I'm looking at this in recent narratives of historical catastrophes, such as the 94 Rwandan genocide and the current so-called migrant crisis in Europe. Focusing on 2 French Jewish writers, Cécile Weichbrot and Hélène Sixou, and the Rwandan one, Scholastic Mukasonga. This paper seeks to highlight the ways in which the Nazi pogrom serves as a transnational trope in narratives dealing with various traumas. And it demonstrates how the circulation of recurring themes among these narratives allows these writers to move beyond victimology. So, as the United Nations General Assembly just released a statement that designated April 7th as the International Day of Reflection on the 94 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, we will see how the Rwandan writer Scholastic Mukasonga, who is a survivor of the 94 genocide, turns the Hutu pogroms against the Tutsi, in which her entire family was murdered, into literature in several books. So her first published testimony was Inyenzi ou les cafards, the cockroaches, and then she published The Barefooted Woman, La Femme aux Pieds Nus, which is a tribute to her mother. She constantly draws comparisons with the Nazi pogrom and the genocide of the European Jews so as to reinscribe her history into a larger transnational and transhistorical framework and to give it more visibility. So then I will quickly move on to French philosopher, feminist and writer Hélène Sixou and her recent autobiographical narratives, Garde Osnabrück à Jérusalem, Osnabrück Station in Jerusalem, published in 2016, and Correspondance avec le mur, Correspondence with the Wall, published in 2017, which revolve around her maternal family's decision to emigrate from Germany to Algeria shortly before Kristallnacht. And then French Jewish writer Cécile Weichbrot, who writes autofictions that all revolve around the 1946 Kielce pogrom, in which her father's family lost a child, her great-uncle, and which decided her paternal family to move to France. Finally, I will briefly explore how the autobiographical text that Sixou and Weichbrot wrote together in 2016, called A German Autobiography, une autobiographie allemande, draws parallels between the Nazi pogrom and the Roma and the migrant situation in today's France. So, according to several French, now I will repeat briefly some things that François mentioned on the first day about the word pogrom, which is a Russian word meaning to wreak havoc, to destroy violently, and was first used to designate an organized attack by one ethnic group against another. So it was first used in 1821 in Odessa to label an anti-Jewish riot. The word is thus highly connotated as pertaining to Jewish history. However, what I find very interesting is that only scholastic Mukasonga uses this word a lot in her writings about the Rwanda, whereas Hélène Sixou and Cécile Weichbro, who are Jewish writers, never use this word. Mukasonga uses this word a lot when she refers to the waves of massacres that were perpetrated by the Hutu from the 1950s onwards until they culminated in 1994. Dory Laub, in his essay dealing with what he calls the imperative to tell, in Trauma Explorations in Memory, writes, I quote, "The survivors did not only need to survive so that they could tell their stories, they also needed to tell their stories in order to survive." So words and telling are central to the literary production of scholastic Mukasonga, insofar as she uses written testimonies and texts as symbolic shrouds for her parents, her brothers and sisters, whose bodies she was never able to recover after the genocide. Therefore, the words she chooses to use when she refers to what happened to the Tutsi are always carefully thought through. So Mukasonga, she was born in 1956 in Rwanda. When she was 3 years old, her family was deported or displaced, as she says, to Nyamata, a polluted Tutsi refugee concentration camp in Rwanda's no man's land, in which the living conditions were extremely harsh. However, thanks to her parents' emphasis on education as a means to a better life, she was able to enter a prestigious Catholic high school in Butare, despite the drastic quotas imposed on Tutsis by the Hutu majority. She was then admitted into a social worker training school, which she eventually had to leave in 1973 when she fled the Rwanda with her older brother to find refuge in Burundi. She settled in France in 1992, only 2 years before the genocide, in which 37 of her relatives died. So let me give a brief reminder of the chronology of the Rwandan genocide as far as Mukasonga's family is concerned. So on April 6, 1994, the Hutu president Habyarimana's plane was shot down. On April 7, a curfew was issued in Nyamata, where Mukasonga's family lived, as well as in the rest of Rwanda, marking the beginning of the genocide. On April 11th, the Kayumba assault is perpetrated. So the families of surviving Tutsis sought shelter inside the Nyamata church. On April 14th, they were all murdered inside the church. The number of casualties is estimated to be between 5,000 and 6,000. The day before, army men from the United Nations MINA force had come to evacuate all the white nuns and missionaries. Out of the 60,000 Tutsis recorded in a January 1994 census in Nyamata, only 5,000 survivors remain. So Mukasonga's fictional and autobiographical writings revolve around this genocide with a constant but ambivalent emphasis on gender issues. Her earlier writings depict Tutsi women as rather free, at least free to receive a higher education. Then, in her more recent novels, she insists increasingly on women's biological roles in Rwandan society, both as heavily constraining but also as making them the targets of the Hutu violence. So, as a Tutsi Rwandan woman, Mukasonga recurringly says that she found herself in a position of triple alienation because of her gender, her ethnicity, and her geographical origin. Thus, all of her texts aim at giving a voice to those who, like her, have survived the historical violence that intended to silence them. So for Mukasonga, it's the words pertaining to the Nazi genocide of the European Jews become the means to re-embodying her body, the female body that was specifically targeted by Hutus for its reproductive capabilities. So all her texts are mostly centered about issues of motherhood, the body, the female body, but this is not something I will have too much time to go into detail today. So first, she always highlights the ethnical apartheid system that had been in place in the Rwanda long before the actual genocide. And she draws a parallel with the gradual segregation suffered by the European Jews in the years leading up to the Holocaust. For instance, she explains that when she took the exam to enter high school, there were only 10% spots for Tutsis that were open, and this was all official. It was nothing hidden, and this has been in place for many years before the actual genocide. Then she describes how, in the wake of the 1959 and 1960 massacres, or pogroms as she calls them, most Tutsi would feel as though their lives were on hold, expecting the worst to hit at any time. So she emphasizes all the words, all the rhetoric that was used by the Hutu propaganda to dehumanize the Tutsis. They were called Inyenzis, which are cockroaches. They were called rats, pest. She draws further parallels with the European Jews' gradual segregation and exclusion from public life, with remarks such as, I quote, "In my school, every single student had to carry an identity card on which their so-called ethnicity was mentioned, branded like a scarlet letter." So she discusses the role of the white colonizers in the rise of violence. So, but in most of her genocide testimonies, she relies heavily on Holocaust vocabulary to describe this particular genocide. But interestingly enough, she does it less and less in her more recent writings, which maybe points to the fact that she's gradually finding her own voice and feeling less of a need for resorting to a Western discourse to describe the Rwandan experience. But in her main testimony, which is Inyenzi, the genocide is omnipresent. The genocide of the Jews is omnipresently compared to the Rwandan one. So the words that she uses are ghetto, ratio, refugees, displaced persons, camps, concentration camps, deportation, ethnical cleansing, and final solution. She uses the word final solution a lot, which can be very controversial. So the following sentence is particularly striking. I quote, "The first pogroms against the Tutsi occurred on November 1st, 1959. The genocide machinery had started. Nothing would now stop it. Until the final solution, it was never to stop again." So now I will quickly move to, I'm just skipping things because these are close textual analysis, and I realized all the papers here were history paper, and I'm I'm not going to talk about tropes and all that. So now Hélène Sixou and Cécile Weichbro, what's interesting in their writings is that they mythologize this Nazi pogrom, this Kristallnacht. So for Hélène Sixou, Kristallnacht is that event which was decisive event in her family history. So her mother, her mother's sister, and her grandmother decided to move to Algeria shortly before the Kristallnacht, and then all the other relatives who stayed behind in Osnabrück were eventually killed. So in all of her writings, she talks about this turning point, that time when you have to make a choice, but you don't know what the future has in store. And she compares it a lot to Orpheus and Eurydice's story, that moment when you make a choice and you make maybe the wrong choice, and then your life is changed forever and you die. So, and for Cécile Weichbro, there is this mythologizing. She also uses the same comparison with Orpheus, that her family, her paternal family, actually survived the Holocaust in Poland, but then her father's brother was killed in the 1946 Kielce pogrom, and she talks about the fact that this pogrom is very little talked about because Kristallnacht is taking the entire public sphere when we talk about pogroms, and people tend to forget that in 1946, after the war, there was again a pogrom in Poland. So, and now their very recent text that they published last year, this German autobiography. So it's written on the epistolary form. It's an exchange of letters between Sixou and Weisbrot, in which they discuss the position of the German language for them. Because for Hélène Sixou, German was her mother's language, but that's also the language in which her people were killed. And for Cécile Weisbrot, she was brought up in Paris, but her parents only spoke Polish and Yiddish to her, and she learned French in school. However, now she lives in Berlin, and her career, she publishes a lot of novels in German, and she's actually more famous in Germany than in France at this point. So they discuss about this complicated relationship that they have with German and with the Holocaust. But in fact, this is like a pretext, because this book can also be read as a kind of manifesto. So at the center of the book is inserted an open letter that Hélène Sixou wrote to the French government a couple of years ago when they were about to dismantle a Roma camp in Paris. And then they draw all these parallels between how the mounting violence preceding the Holocaust is paralleled in this so-called migrant crisis in today's France. All this rhetoric of violence, of othering, how this is all happening again. They use words such as finding a solution to this migrant crisis, and they emphasize the parallels between the Jewish question and the migrant question. So anyway, just if I can conclude briefly, is what strikes me the most is how Mukasonga constantly draws these parallels with the genocide of the Jews and the Rwandan genocide, using the exact same words, such as pogrom, displaced persons, concentration camp, final solution, and how Sixou and Weisbrot, on the other hand, never use any of these words. Everything is a periphrase or a metaphor, and they try to open up lines of communications with what's happening right now. So in order to draw the attention to this, what's going on right now in Europe. So, thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much for that nice presentation. I do think, I just wanted to raise the question about the Holocaust serving as a kind of like template in literature, but also visual representations of other genocides. And I think what you're presenting, so like here, speaks to the possibilities and limits, right? There's a kind of like mapping onto the Holocaust as a template also for, I guess, public visibility and recognition. And, you know, I also worked with the Armenian genocide, and it's analogous to this. And I feel one of the questions is, you know, do we really need this kind of validation through the terminology of the Holocaust, which then so like hovers there as a kind of like screen memory in the background, but it's only become to like and not quite an anti-signifier, but a point of reference of analogy that does a kind of like continuous work of validation, right? And I wonder how that relates to the specificity of the experience of the Rwandan genocide. So I don't know, I feel very ambivalent about this, and while I understand this gesture, I feel we also need to be critical about this, and I'm wondering where you stand, what your take on this is.
No, so this is exactly what I was trying to point at, and of course this is very controversial, this use of the Holocaust imagery. In many, Scholastic Mukasonga is not the only Rwandan survivor who uses this semantic field. it just points basically to the fact that the Rwandan genocide is very little talked about comparatively, and initially, when she first published her testimony 14 years ago, it was in 2004, there was no adequate words to talk about it. So this is very much discussed in the area of cultural studies. Maybe you've read Michael Rothberg or Ryan Hirsch. Of course, the Holocaust tends to occupy so much of the public sphere and has so much visibility that for people who come from minority, traumatic even, minority genocides, sadly, if they want to have some kind of visibility, they feel that they need to use this vocabulary. But Mukasonga, in her later works, she stops using this Nazi imagery. She shifts towards, she uses actually more and more Kinyarwanda words in her later works.
Thank you for the presentation. I know most of the text you have, being a French reader, most of the text you mentioned. I know N6 also.
Of course.
So I have first a question about the literary genre. We discuss a lot in Europe at the moment the problem of kind of what we say documentary literature, the literature that is too much based, and I would say, on the reading of our work, our historians. Do you find this also? Do you find the references of work by historians, that will pertain into this literary work? I have the answer from N6 because I asked her.
Oh, okay, well, I'm interested to hear that.
So that's my first question. And my second question, can we go a bit even beyond what you have very nicely, very finely described, this template, of the Holocaust, saying that even in some text, literary text, who want to describe genocide, let's say Rwanda, and don't mention the Holocaust. In fact, the tropes, as you would say, are the tropes of the Holocaust. Vocabulary. I'm thinking of the book that is widely read in that sense. It's called Abubakar Diop, on the Rwandan genocide, this African writer, and it's very funny to see that we have no mention of the Holocaust. But the typology of people, like I say, literary tropes are the ones, to my view, of the Holocaust.
Oh, yes, I completely agree with you. So about your first question, I hope I understand correctly. So the texts that I look at by Sixou and by Baijayanti are self-proclaimed autofictions anyway, so they are autobiographical, but not completely. They're always blurring the genre lines. So
but it's based on documents.
Definitely. So you want to know my opinion? Because Baijayanti, she definitely. So I've interviewed her a lot. It's interesting because Sixou probably told you that this is all fiction. Last year I was at a conference for our 80th birthday, and Sixou said, I don't like when people talk about trauma when they read my work, because there's only joy and happiness in what I write. There is no trauma. Okay. But Baijayanti, on the other hand, she tells me that she calls it autofiction, but it's completely autobiographical. She went back, she did a lot of archival research, she went back to Rwandan, she interviewed lots of people, so
she knows the literature.
Exactly. She knows all the cultural approach, like Michael Rothberg, Ryan Hirsch, she knows them, so of course this is, it could be called document fiction, or it's very, I think now when we come to these topics, the line between literature and history is very much blurred.
Especially in France.
Interesting, I never thought about that. You think it's mostly a French thing? I'm so focused in French-speaking stuff, so...
The literary work, Jablonka, and all the literary part, the work on Mandel, that we don't know what it is. Is it history, or is it...
But it's also, isn't it also part of a kind of like specifically second generation literary discourse that exactly sees it positions itself as a bridge between, I guess, survivor memory and then a kind of like reimaginative, experiment that precisely draws on the Holocaust as the screen memory, right? From which to draw certain sources, and it may be documents, but it also may be other materials, right? So this seems to be specific to, I guess, it's kind of second generation or third generation writing.
So in the case of the Survivors, yes, definitely it's the second generation, and there are other French writers who could be put in the same bag. So this is the whole issue of post-memory. But in the case of Mukasanga, she's not second generation, and Hélène Sixou, it's complicated. She was born in '38, so but she was born in Algeria. So, but maybe a screen memory that it could be. I see your point, but I don't really agree. Sorry to come back to Jean-Marc's question. Also, now that I live in Hawaii, I work on the French-speaking women writers of the South Pacific from Tahiti and New Caledonia, and that will echo what the first presenter said. It's too bad that she's gone, because now, for instance, Titawa Peu just published a novel called Pina that takes place in a very difficult suburb of Papeete, the capital city of Tahiti. There are lots of references in the novel in which she says, this is like Auschwitz, and this is very strong. So this is a kind of shifting of the Holocaust metaphor, but that's a whole different realm.
I have a question, and I direct it to you and anyone in the audience. At one point, you talked about her in one of her novels, which talks about, she refers to the final solution. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, when is the first reference that anyone here has come up with the final solution to somebody using the phrase or the trope, the final solution to the Jewish problem? I found it in September 1935 in Los Angeles. Yes, well, I'm wondering if anyone found it earlier.
Well, the Endlösung was a fantasy that in Germany was common in the Weimar Republic. Endlösung of just all sorts of problems, and the Jewish question would only be one of them. Like the Endlösung of public transportation. The Endlösung of
but that's different. The Jewish question is an older expression and an older term.
It's been used in the 20s.
But did they use the term the final solution to the Jewish problem?
And it was nothing special in those days to talk about the final solution. So the final solution has metaphor for genocide. Mm-hmm. Is something that comes up sometime in the 30s or 40s, and is sort of re-imported from foreign discourse into the German.
Well, and they use it to camouflage, precisely because it was so well established for anything. It's like because it was such a term that would be used for whatever.
And that's
why the Nazis used it to camouflage.
Of course, it has this totalitarian, you can say, root, which is we can once and for all solve any problem as soon as we have the power. But the Social Democrats would discuss about final solutions, for instance, to public transportation issues.
Well, the instance I found, it was a man who founded the American Nationalist Party, one of the major fascist groups in LA, and printed up a proclamation. He was an attorney who never practiced. He printed up a proclamation, full page, that they slipped in. He went in the middle of the night on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, and he had worked as a linotype operator at the LA Times, and he and his friends who were still there snuck it in, inserted it into every Sunday morning paper. Imagine it's delivered to everyone in Los Angeles who gets the Times, and out, when they open their newspaper, out comes this one-page sheet, and the middle of it says, "I call upon all God-fearing Christians to join me in enacting the final solution that is not obtainable through legislative methods alone." And the final solution for him was bloodbaths, Nazi bloodbaths. I mean, bloodbaths of killing Jews in Los Angeles that would lead to bloodbaths throughout America. I was just curious if someone,
What was the date?
September 1935.
I don't know if it's widely known, but Ngrams is a great tool to look at concepts and short phrases of up to 4 words. Google Books has scanned millions of books, and they're in different language corpuses. And if you go to books.google.com/ngram, you can type in Endlösung and go to the German corpus, and it will show you a graph of the percentage of words every year since 1800, where that word was used, and you can click at the bottom and see the actual books in which the word comes. Ngram, just N-G-R-A-M. And you can do the English corpus, you could do final solution as just a 2-word phrase, and just, it'll pull up esoteric newspapers, journals, books.
What's the book again?
Ngrams.
And the just fonts in different
And
colors.
like number and gram. So I'd like to get back to the talk, if I may. I found it very interesting to compare across the 3 talks you mentioned, Michael Rothberg's multi-directional memory, and how, so let me take a step back and say, in the historians' debate in Germany in 1986-87, it was often phrased as a question of whether the uniqueness of the Holocaust, whether the comparability of the Holocaust and other genocides. And we get to the question of, and in the talk on Tel-Aviv as well, is whether the comparison deflates, removes the historical context from those events, or as Rothberg argues, whether it enriches it actually in the comparison and doesn't detract from the Holocaust in any way, but actually increases our awareness of the different dimensions of it. And I find it very interesting to see how these other genocides kind of, and in my opinion, magnify the knowledge of the Holocaust, and I think enrich our own knowledge of Kristallnacht in this whole conference. So I was wondering, how do you apply Rothberg and the Rwandan genocide? What kind of conclusions do you bring as it?
Well, yeah, I agree with you that the comparison not only does not take away anything from the Holocaust, but in the first few years after the Rwandan genocide, when there were no adequate words for it, it did help give it more visibility for those survivors who use this framework. And now there are associations of victims who are asking for the word genocide to be actually used. Even Mukasonga, she describes how she went back more than 10 years after the events, and people still called it the events. So definitely this multi-directional approach serves to create these bridges between different things happening, or if you see recurring words, it gives more visibility to what otherwise would not be so visible, so that we don't limit our view to one thing. And yeah, it's definitely a very, very productive framework that Rothberg came up with. And yeah, but comparing does not mean equating, as he says, so it definitely helps find sometimes shift. Or like Judith Butler, who talks about the scale of grievability. If there are, it's not about one genocide being more grievable than the other one. They are just different, but they coexist on this map of powers. And of course, depending on where something happens, depending on the socio-political position of that country, it will have more or less visibility. So if the Holocaust can be used, at least in the literary text that I'm looking at, as a productive trope to shift the view from the Holocaust itself and give more visibility to other genocide, then it's
yeah. So I'm not sure if this is a question, but I was really struck by your example of the Tahitian use of the word Auschwitz. And yet we know that within communities, and at least in some ways Jewish communities are in consciousness here, there's objection to using words and saying, well, that wasn't really a Holocaust, that was minor, that was, so how do you see the kind of political dimensions of, in a sense, offense that's taken in the invocation of, it could be Holocaust or it could be something else. They'll use the word ghetto. Many, many other terms like that, and how, again, some of the Jewish texts and communal contexts go the best, in a way not wanting others to use those words because it is theirs. And that in a sense, they feel that there's at least a kind of narrative, an argument that by having somebody in Tahiti use the word Auschwitz, it's taking away from the reality of Auschwitz, and it's not theirs to use.
So, your question is about?
I'm just curious your kind of observation. I said I wasn't sure if it was a question, but your perhaps observation, what you might make sense, how you would make sense of that.
So for me, on the other side of the coin, these Tahitian women writers or these Caledonian women writers, they have zero visibility.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even in the field of Francophone studies in the United States right now, when they say Francophone studies, they think about every possible area of former French colonies, but not the South Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
So they feel extremely excluded. So for them, it's a way of shocking the audience, getting visibility. So
then I have no problem with it. It's just that is a discourse out there, which is you can't use it.
Yeah, well, so of course, so the situation in Tahiti as well as in Hawaii is extremely complicated. I know it's not the topic of this conference, but the same thing happens now in Hawaii. At the University of Hawaii, we have a large center for Hawaiian studies, and you're always working on eggshells whenever, for instance, if I present a paper about the Holocaust there, it's very complicated because they claim that what the Americans did to the Hawaiian people is in many ways as bad, if not worse, than the Holocaust, and they also sometimes use Holocaust imagery. So, of course, there is pushback on both ways, both in Tahiti and in Hawaii. There are people who say, yeah, well, you cannot exaggerate. This has nothing to do. The Holocaust is a very different event. It was organized killing and etc. So this is a very different debate, but very controversial. So I don't.
Last question.
Okay, I just have a comment. I think it is in a certain way absolutely inevitable that within the global circulation of Holocaust, iconic imagery of the Holocaust, but also, terminology in Auschwitz, nobody, the question is who owns that terminology and the channels of circulation. They have become globalized, they have become displaced. Of course they will get appropriated, re-inscribed, and re-inscribed exactly uncomfortably, outside of, possibilities of control. I just feel that seems to be something that, I don't know, we can feel, regret about, but I do think it has entered a kind of circulatory economy that, who knows, it may not, I don't know, I just, who knows, maybe it does something good. I mean, so maybe we should also talk about how one can or cannot control meaning. I think Liat made a very strong case of how in Israel, foundational narrative of the Holocaust, that meaning gets constantly evaporated, shifted, right? So that's already an example of how shifting ideologies actually evacuate the historical context of the Holocaust. And this would be, I also do want to make a pitch for what does it mean for, let's say, women writers of the South Pacific to be drawing attention to let's say, horrific conditions that potentially may resemble something akin to, and it's an analogy to the Holocaust, but that is not exactly Auschwitz, right? Are we willing to accept that Auschwitz in repetition in these different geographic concepts means, of course, something entirely different, right? And I'd want us to think about that as well.
Yeah, if I just may ask one thing, may add something, is just that for me, what it points to is not so much the fact that who owns the Holocaust terminology. Again, I'm not a political science or historian person, but it sadly points to the fact that those minority memories or these minority discourses, they haven't found the adequate words yet. They're still finding a way of expressing themselves and of gaining visibility, and this is what it shows mainly.
We're going to take a 10-minute break, stretch your legs, clear your heads, and let's come back for a scintillating conclusion of the final discussion.